So we know we have Azure, and we know we can create virtual machines in Azure. Let's sort of draw that out, right? I've got Azure. And I've got a virtual machine in Azure. We'll say that's VM1. Okay? And as long as I'm in Azure, that's all good. But in reality, at some point, somebody's going to need to interact with that, right? I've got my user over here. And the user's got a very large laptop. And the user needs to get to the web application that's running on that virtual machine, right? Well, by default, user can't do that. All right, now the way the user gets to that depends on whether we are working in version 1, the Azure Services Model, Management Model, or version 2, the Azure Resource Management Model, because the architecture is really significantly different. Okay, if this is a version 1 virtual machine, then that virtual machine exists within the context. I didn't really give myself much room to write this, so let's see there. There we go, got it. Okay. Exists within the context of a cloud service. And in order to provide access to the user, I need to create what's called a custom endpoint on the virtual machine. And I create a custom endpoint for a specific port, or I can also specify by service, which will do it for the port. All right? And so what that really does, the cloud service has a public interface. And really what the endpoint does is it ties a particular port to a particular virtual machine through that cloud service, through that public interface provided by the cloud service. Now, I can also then add an ACL to that, which is really kind of a mini version of firewall rule to that. Okay, but that's the only, I can't even do that until I provide that endpoint. All right, and it's very easy to add an endpoint. You can do it through the portal. Okay, now the way that the resource management model works is really completely different. Okay, with the resource management model, I still create a virtual machine. Okay, but I associate that with a, if I choose to, with a public IP address. So I create a separate object called a public IP address, and I can actually associate a public IP address with different things, like a load balancer, or I can associate that public IP address directly with the virtual machine. Okay, now, by default, when I associate a public IP address with a virtual machine, it is wide open. Okay, and then what I will typically do is associate what's called a network security group with that public IP address. Okay, and actually with the NIC card associated with that. And we're not getting deep into that, but you do need to know I can completely secure it. The network security group is really a much more advanced way of controlling access by a tuple, love saying that word, of identities, the request IP address and port number, the destination IP address and port number, and even is it going through TCP or UDP. So it's very configurable. All right? In any case, I need one of these two things, either a custom endpoint or a public IP address, so that my user can happily access the functionality that's riding in the virtual machines. Now, one other quick thing, this is really applicable for virtual machine workloads. If we're using one of the platform services that we will talk about, such as web application, this doesn't apply because that's already built into that platform concept. This is when I'm creating workloads that are running on custom virtual machines inside of Azure, and I need to provide external access to those custom virtual machines.